The crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom shimmered like frozen tears above the sea of silk and diamonds. London, 1852. The air was thick with perfumed champagne and cruel laughter. Selene Blackwell stood alone beneath the brightest light, her emerald gown catching every cruel glance in the room. Her spine was straight, her gloved hands perfectly still at her sides, but inside, she was shattering. Then came the voice, sharp, clear, merciless. 6 years, Vivian Blackwell announced to the entire assembly, her diamond necklace flashing like a blade, and still, this woman has given my grandson no heir. She is a curse upon the Blackwell name, a beautiful, empty vessel. Gasps rippled through the crowd like wind across wheat. Fans snapped open. Eyes widened with delight at the scandal. Selena felt the words slice straight into her chest. She lifted her chin and offered the room the smallest, most graceful smile she could manage, a perfect Duchess smile. But her heart was screaming. A few feet away, her husband Ronan Blackwell, the Duke of Blackwood, stood motionless in his perfectly tailored black evening coat. His jaw was tight. His storm-gray eyes flicked toward her for half a second. Then away. He said nothing. Not one word to defend her. Not even a flicker of protest. The silence from the man she had married burned worse than any insult from his grandmother. Selene's fingers tightened inside her gloves until her nails bit into her palms. 6 years of this. 6 years of being paraded, inspected, and found wanting. 6 years of waking up in a cold bed while her husband buried himself in ledgers and duty. 6 years of hearing whispers behind closed doors. Poor Ronan, saddled with a barren wife. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. Instead, she simply inclined her head with regal calm and whispered to no one, "Excuse me." As she glided through the glittering crowd, the music swelled again, as if the ton had already forgotten the wound they had just witnessed. But Selene would never forget. Later that night, back at Blackwood House, the grand mansion felt more like a gilded prison than ever. Selene sat alone at her writing desk in the small private salon, the fire crackling low. Her hands trembled as she folded a letter sealed with plain wax, no noble crest. This letter was dangerous. It contained the latest plans for Quill Haven, the secret sanctuary she had been building in the remote hills of Yorkshire. A safe home for widowed women and orphaned children. A place where they could learn skills, raise their babies in peace, and never again be at the mercy of cruel husbands or indifferent society. She had funded it with every penny of her own modest inheritance, sold pieces of jewelry no one would miss, and relied on two unlikely allies, Greta Quill, her quiet, fiercely loyal lady's maid, who had known her since childhood, and Sage Quill, Greta's sharp-witted younger sister, who moved like a shadow between London and the north. No one in the Blackwell family knew. Not even Ronan. Especially not Ronan. A soft knock sounded at the door. Selene quickly slipped the letter into a hidden drawer. Enter. Scarlett Langford stepped inside, her auburn hair slightly tousled from the ball eyes bright with concern. Her dearest friend, perhaps her only true friend, in this glittering cage. Selene, I saw what happened tonight. Scarlett's voice was low urgent. Vivian was unforgivable. And Ronan God, the way he just stood there. Selene turned, forcing another calm smile, even as fresh pain bloomed behind her ribs. It is nothing I haven't endured before. But Scarlett wasn't fooled. She crossed the room and gently took Selene's hands. As she did, a small folded letter slipped from Selene's sleeve and fluttered to the carpet between them. Scarlett bent to pick it up. Her fingers brushed the plain seal. Selene's breath caught. For one terrifying heartbeat, time froze. If Scarlett opened it, if she asked questions, everything Selene had built in secret could crumble before it ever had the chance to help a single soul. Scarlett looked down at the letter, then slowly lifted her gaze to Selene's face. Her eyes narrowed with quiet understanding. "Whatever this is," she whispered, "you're not alone in it." Selene's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to snatch the letter back. She wanted to confess everything: the loneliness, the rage, the fragile hope she had been nurturing in the dark. Instead, she simply reached out, took the letter from her friend's hand, and tucked it safely away once more. "Not tonight, Scarlet," she said softly, her voice steady despite the storm inside. "But one day, perhaps." Outside the window, London rain began to fall, tapping against the glass like impatient fingers. Selene stared into the fire, the reflection of flames dancing in her eyes. She was tired of being invisible, tired of being judged by the emptiness of her womb instead of the fire in her soul. And somewhere in the wild, windswept hills of Yorkshire, a hidden sanctuary was slowly coming to life, one brick one, rescued woman, one saved child at a time. A sanctuary built by a duchess the world had already decided was worthless. The rain had barely stopped falling over London when Selene Blackwell slipped away from Blackwood House before dawn. She wore a simple widow's gown of deep charcoal wool, her dark hair tucked beneath a plain bonnet. No diamonds, no silk. Just the quiet determination burning behind her eyes. By the time the carriage wheels touched the muddy roads of Yorkshire, 3 days later, she was no longer the Duchess of Blackwood. She was Mrs. Eleanor Shaw, a grieving widow seeking a new beginning. The wind whipped across the rolling hills as Selene stepped down outside a half-finished stone building nestled between ancient oaks. Quill Haven, her secret, her rebellion. Beatrice Knox was already waiting, arms wrapped tightly around her thin shawl. The young mother's face still carried the faint shadow of old bruises, but her eyes lit with fierce hope the moment she saw Selene. "You came?" Beatrice whispered, voice cracking. "I wasn't sure. After last month's storm damaged the roof." Selene reached out and took the woman's cold hands in hers. "I will always come." Together they walked through the half-built sanctuary. Women moved quietly inside some rocking infants, others learning to sew or read by candlelight. This was more than shelter. This was the first breath of freedom many of them had ever known. Every brick laid here was paid for with pieces of Selene's own soul. A sapphire bracelet sold in secret. A pair of emerald earrings slipped to Greta Quill during a quiet night at Blackwood House. Small sacrifices no one in London would ever miss. And Scarlett Langford's clever network of discreet friends had begun to send quiet donations, enough to keep the dream breathing. Back at Blackwood Estate, the world moved on without her. Ronan Blackwell sat behind the massive oak desk in his study, surrounded by ledgers and land maps. His grandmother Vivian Blackwell paced slowly before the fireplace, her black silk dress whispering like a threat. "We cannot wait any longer," Ronan Vivian said coldly. 6 years and still no child. The ton is laughing. You need a proper heir and a proper wife. Isla Munro has never stopped caring for you. She would give you sons. Strong ones." Ronan's hand tightened around the quill until the feather bent. He remembered Isla, beautiful, ambitious, everything society expected. Once long ago, he had considered her. Before Selene. Before the weight of duty had crushed every soft feeling in his chest. "I am still married, grandmother?" His voice was low, tired. Vivian's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "In name only. That girl is decorative at best. Useless at worst." Ronan said nothing. Days blurred into weeks. Selene returned to London only when necessary, slipping back into her role as the silent duchess with practiced grace. But the distance between her and Ronan grew wider with every passing night. One cold evening, after a long dinner where they barely spoke, Ronan stood by the library window, brandy glass in hand. Selene lingered near the doorway, unsure whether to leave or stay. He spoke without turning. "Sometimes I wonder." His voice was rough, distant. What is the point of a wife who cannot even give me an heir? She is little more than a beautiful statue in my house, lovely to look at, empty inside. The words landed like stones in still water. Selene froze. Something inside her chest cracked open, raw bleeding silent. She felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, but refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of him. She drew in a slow, trembling breath. "Is that truly how you see me, Ronan?" she asked softly. He turned then. For a moment his gray eyes flickered, with something regret confusion, before the mask of duty slipped back into place. "I speak only the truth." Selene nodded once slowly. Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the long corridor like the last beats of a dying heart. She did not cry that night. Instead, she sat at her desk until the candles burned low, counting the coins from her latest sold bracelet. Enough for new blankets at Quill Haven. Enough for medicine for Beatrice's feverish little girl. Every tear she refused to shed became another brick in her secret sanctuary. But the pain did not leave. It settled deep in her bones, a constant ache she carried, while smiling at society teas and nodding through endless balls. Then came the letter that changed everything. Greta Quill arrived one stormy afternoon, soaked to the bone, her face pale with fear. "My lady, there was an accident at Quill Haven. A beam collapsed during the storm. Beatrice was inside with the children. You were almost there." Selene's blood turned to ice. She left that same night, riding through wind and rain without telling anyone. When she reached Yorkshire at dawn, the damage was worse than she feared. Part of the roof had caved in. Beatrice sat huddled with her daughter, both covered in dust, but alive. Selene dropped to her knees beside them, pulling them into her arms. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice breaking for the first time in months. "I should have been here." Beatrice touched Selene's cheek with trembling fingers. "You gave us hope, my lady. That is more than anyone else ever has." Far away in London, Ronan Blackwell stood in the empty drawing room of Blackwood House. Selene had been gone for 3 days. No note, no explanation. He told himself it did not matter. She had been distant for months now. Quiet. Withdrawn. Yet something felt wrong. The house felt too large. Too silent. For the first time in 6 years, Ronan noticed the absence of his wife, like a missing limb. He poured another brandy and stared into the fire, unease crawling beneath his skin. Where was she? And why did the thought of losing her suddenly feel like drowning? The storm outside Blackwood Estate howled like a wounded animal. Inside the grand library, the air was even colder. Selene stood near the fireplace, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, while Victorian Blackwell paced like a predator, circling wounded prey. Ronan sat at the head of the long oak table, his face carved from stone. Vivian slammed a stack of financial papers onto the table. "Explain this," she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Large sums of money disappearing from your personal accounts, Selene. Jewelry vanishing. Secret transfers to the north. You have been stealing from this family to feed your little charity for the filth of Yorkshire." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Selene's heart slammed against her ribs. She had known this moment might come. She had feared it. But she had not expected the pain to feel quite so raw. Ronan's gray eyes lifted slowly to her face. For the first time in months, he truly looked at her. "Selene." His voice was low-strained. "Is this true?" She drew in a shaky breath. 6 years of silence rose up inside her, like a tide she could no longer hold back. Yes. The single word fell like a stone into still water. Vivian's triumphant laugh echoed off the walls. "I knew it. She has been siphoning funds to support those worthless widows and their bastard children. She is not only barren, she is a thief." Selene's hands trembled, but she lifted her chin. Her voice, when it came, was quiet at first, then stronger, fiercer, until it filled the entire room. I am not a thief. Every penny I used was mine. Money from my mother's inheritance, pieces of jewelry that were given to me. You call those women filth, those worthless widows. Duh. She took one step forward, eyes blazing. I have watched them suffer in ways you could never imagine. Beaten, abandoned, starved because society decided they were no longer useful. I built Quill Haven so they could learn a trade, feed their children, and hold their heads high again. While you sat here counting heirs and bloodlines, I was saving lives. Real lives. Not just the precious Blackwell name. Her voice cracked, but she did not stop. I am not a machine meant only to produce your heir, Ronan. I am not a beautiful statue to decorate your house. I am a woman who refused to spend the rest of her life waiting to be wanted. So I chose to become someone who matters. Silence crashed over the library. Ronan stared at her, his face pale with shock. The ledgers, the duty, the endless pressure from his grandmother. Everything faded as the weight of her words sank in. He had never known. Never suspected the depth of her pain, or the fire she had been hiding all these years. Before he could speak, the library doors burst open. Harlan Hayes strode in rain, dripping from his cloak, a smug smile twisting his lips. Selene's father. I heard there was trouble in the Blackwell family, he announced smoothly. And since my daughter's reputation and fortune are now in question, I believe it is time we discussed her dowry and future arrangements. Vivian's eyes gleamed with dark satisfaction. Ronan rose slowly from his chair, his gaze shifting between his wife and her father. The pressure in the room thickened until it felt suffocating. Selene looked at her husband. For one heartbreaking second she waited, hoping he would finally choose her. But Ronan hesitated. His jaw tightened. The weight of generations' duty and his grandmother's icy stare pressed down on him. That hesitation was all Selene needed to see. Pain sharp and blinding tore through her chest. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the library. That night, the rain fell in sheets. Selene stood in her bedroom, packing only what she could carry in one small trunk. No grand escape, no dramatic farewell, just the quiet, desperate need to protect what she had built. Greta Quill helped her in silence, tears shining in her eyes. You don't have to do this alone, my lady. I'm not running away, Selene whispered, voice thick with emotion. I'm protecting them. If I stay, they will destroy Quill Haven. I won't let that happen. She paused at the door, fingers brushing the frame one last time. Memories flooded in the cold nights, the lonely dinners, the way Ronan had once looked at her with something almost like warmth before duty froze it all. Then she stepped into the storm. The rain soaked her cloak instantly as she climbed into the waiting carriage. Lightning split the sky above Blackwood Estate. Inside the house, Ronan stood alone in Selene's empty bedroom. The fire had gone out. Her scent still lingered, faintly lavender, and something uniquely hers. The wardrobe doors hung open. A single forgotten hairpin glinted on the dressing table. He crossed the room slowly and sank into the chair by her writing desk. For the first time in 6 long years, the silence felt unbearable. The space she had left behind was not just physical. It was a gaping hole in his chest he had never noticed until now. Ronan buried his face in his hands. What have I done? The days after Selene left blurred into a haze of rain and regret. Ronan Blackwell rode through the storm-swept roads of Yorkshire himself, cloak heavy with water heart heavier still. He had no map, only the faint directions Greta Quill had finally given him after hours of pleading. When he reached Quill Haven, the sight stopped him cold. A simple stone building stood against the wild hill's windows, glowing softly with lantern light. Women moved inside, some laughing quietly, others rocking babies, a few practicing letters at a long wooden table. This was no fleeting charity. This was a world Selene had built with her own hidden strength. Greta Quill met him at the door, her expression guarded. Beside her stood Sage Quill, arms crossed, eyes sharp with distrust. "You came?" Greta said quietly. "But she isn't here?" Ronan stepped inside, dripping rainwater onto the clean floor. His voice was rough. "Tell me everything." And they did. Hour after hour, the two sisters spoke. They told him how Selene had sold her mother's jewels, piece by piece. How she had ridden through winter storms to bring medicine and blankets. How she had quietly fought to change local laws so widowed women could keep their children instead of losing them to workhouses. Ronan listened in stunned silence. Every word felt like a knife twisting deeper into his chest. He had called her a beautiful statue. He had let his grandmother treat her like a failure. While he buried himself in duty and ledgers, Selene had been out here, saving lives, giving hope, becoming the woman he had never bothered to truly see. By the time the sisters finished speaking, Ronan's hands were shaking. I never knew," he whispered, voice breaking. "God help me. I never knew." Back in London, Victorian Blackwell wasted no time. She summoned lawyers and allies, joining forces with Harlan Hayes, who saw only the chance to reclaim money and status. Together, they prepared to declare Selene mentally unfit, strip her of any remaining rights, and dissolve the marriage on grounds of barrenness and instability. The family hearing took place in the Grand Council Chamber of Blackwood House in London. Heavy oak panels, flickering candlelight, and the weight of centuries of tradition pressed down on everyone present. Vivian sat like a queen on her throne, Harlan Hayes beside her with a satisfied smirk. Ronan stood near the window, his face pale shadows under his eyes. Then the doors opened. Selene walked in. She wore a simple dark gown, no jewels, no elaborate hairstyle. Yet she carried herself with a quiet power that made the room fall silent. She was not broken. She was not pleading. She had come to fight. Behind her walked Beatrice Knox, holding her young daughter's hand. The woman's face still showed faint scars, but her eyes burned with determination. Vivian rose sharply. "This hearing is for family only." "She stays," Ronan said, his voice cutting through the air for the first time. All eyes turned to him. Selene met his gaze across the room. For a moment, something raw and painful passed between them. Years of unspoken hurt, missed chances, and buried longing. Beatrice stepped forward, voice trembling but clear. "My lady saved me and my child when no one else would. My husband beat me near to death. The law would have taken my daughter away. Selene, Mrs. Eleanor Shaw, gave us shelter, taught me to sew, helped me stand on my own feet again. She has done this for dozens of women, hundreds of children. Without her, we would be dead or worse." The room stirred. Vivian's face twisted with fury. Lies from a common enough. Ronan's voice rang out deep and final. He stepped forward until he stood beside Selene. He looked straight at his grandmother. "I have been blind for 6 years. I let society and duty define my wife's worth by whether she could give me a son. I let you treat her with contempt while I stood silent. I called her empty when she was the fullest heart in this entire house." His voice cracked with raw regret. Selene didn't steal from this family. She used her own money, her own courage to build something far greater than another Blackwell heir. She built hope. Real breathing hope for women this world has thrown away. And I failed her in every way a husband can fail. He turned to Selene, eyes glistening. "I was wrong. Deeply, painfully wrong. You are not a vessel. You are not a statue. You are the strongest, most extraordinary woman I have ever known. And I was too much a coward to see it." Selene's breath caught. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she held them back. The pain of 6 years did not vanish in a single moment, But something inside her chest shifted a tiny spark of light in the long darkness. Harlan Hayes tried to protest, but Ronan silenced him with one cold look. "This hearing is over," Ronan declared. "There will be no declaration of madness, no dissolution. And grandmother, your influence over this family ends today." Vivian Blackwell sat frozen, her power crumbling before her eyes. As the meeting broke apart in stunned whispers, Ronan turned fully to Selene. His hand hovered near hers, afraid to touch, afraid she would pull away. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quietly, voice thick with emotion. "But I am ready to spend every day proving I can be the man you deserved from the beginning." Selene looked at him for a long moment, at the regret carved into his face, at the fear and hope warring in his eyes. She did not take his hand. Not yet. But she did not walk away either. Outside, the rain had finally stopped. A pale sliver of moonlight broke through the clouds, casting a soft glow over the wet streets of London. For the first time in 6 years, the silence between them felt different. Not empty. Just waiting. The journey back to Blackwood Estate was quiet, yet filled with a new kind of tension. Not the cold silence of before, but the careful, trembling silence of two people learning how to breathe the same air again. Selene sat across from Ronan in the carriage, her hands folded in her lap. She watched the rolling hills pass by the window, heart still guarded, still healing. Ronan kept stealing glances at her, as if afraid she might vanish if he looked away too long. When they finally stepped through the grand doors of Blackwood House, everything felt different. The very next week, Vivian Blackwell was quietly escorted to a modest house on the edge of Yorkshire. No grand farewell, no tears. Only the cold finality of Ronan's voice, as he told his grandmother she would no longer have any say in the affairs of the family. For the first time in decades, the iron grip of the dowager had been broken. Ronan then did something no one expected. He stood before the entire household and publicly declared his full support for Quill Haven. What had once been Selene's secret sanctuary became an official project of the Blackwell family. Funds were released, land was granted. Within months, the sanctuary began to grow, spreading its light across other counties in England. Selene watched it all with quiet wonder. She no longer had to hide. And slowly, very slowly, the walls between her and Ronan began to crumble. Late one winter evening, as snow fell softly outside the windows, Ronan found her in the small salon where she used to write her secret letters. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands gently in his. "I don't deserve you," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "But if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life becoming worthy of the woman I married." Selene looked down at him. Tears shimmered in her eyes. She remembered every cold night, every cruel word, every moment she had felt invisible. Yet here he was, broken open, honest, and desperately in love. She didn't speak at first. Then she leaned forward and rested her forehead against his. "We start again," she whispered. "Not as Duke and Duchess, but as Ronan and Selene." Months later, in the soft light of spring, Selene discovered she was carrying a child. This time, there was no pressure, no duty, only the quiet joy of two hearts that had finally found their way back to each other. When their daughter was born on a bright September morning, they named her Hope Blackwell. She came into the world with a strong cry, tiny fingers wrapping around her father's thumb, as Ronan held her with trembling hands and tears streaming down his face. "She's perfect," he whispered, voice breaking, "just like her mother." The grand reopening of the expanded Quill Haven took place the following summer. Hundreds gathered on the Yorkshire hills, noble and commoner alike. Lanterns glowed softly as the sun began to set. Selene stood on the wooden platform they had built, her hand resting lightly on her husband's arm. She looked out over the crowd at Beatrice Knox, smiling proudly with her daughter at Scarlet Langford, standing tall beside her at the many women whose lives had been changed forever. Selene's voice rang clear and steady across the hills. A woman does not need to bear a child to prove her worth. She only needs the courage to live fully, and the heart to love without fear. That is the true legacy we build here. Ronan stepped forward, then taking her hand openly in front of everyone. His voice carried across the gathered crowd, raw and sincere. I spent nearly 7 years failing to see the extraordinary woman standing beside me. I let pride and duty blind me. But Selene, my wife, taught me that real strength has nothing to do with titles or heirs. It has everything to do with kindness and courage. I am honored to stand beside her today, and every day for the rest of our lives. He lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. The crowd erupted in warm applause. Scarlet Langford and Beatrice Knox stood side by side, watching with shining eyes. They had become more than friends. They had become true partners in the work that would continue long after this day. Years later, on a golden autumn evening, Selene and Ronan stood together on the hill overlooking Quill Haven. Lanterns twinkled below like stars fallen to earth. The sound of children's laughter drifted up on the breeze. In Ronan's arms, little Hope slept peacefully, her small head resting against her father's chest. Selene leaned into her husband's side, his arm wrapped securely around her waist. "We are not the same people we once were," she said softly. "No," Ronan replied, his voice deep with quiet wonder. "We are better. Because of you." He turned to look at her eyes, full of the love he had once been too afraid to feel. "I see you now, Selene. Every single day. I see you." She smiled a real, warm, unguarded smile that reached all the way to her eyes. And in that moment, standing on the hill with their daughter between them and the sanctuary they had built glowing below, they were no longer simply the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood. They were simply two people who had walked through fire and learned how to hold each other's hearts with care. This story reminds us that the greatest strength lies in rising after society has tried to break you, and that real love only begins when we finally dare to see the true worth in one another beyond every expectation and every prejudice. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours. Thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal, barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.